Daber al b'nei Yisrael v'omarto aleihem, Odom ki yakriv mikem korban laHashem. With these words, Parshas Vayikra, and indeed the book of Vayikra begins, and the Pasuk tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Daber al b'nei Yisrael v'omarto aleihem. Tell them, Odom ki yakriv mikem korban laHashem. If a person comes to bring a korban, how should he do it? And that's it. We get into chapters and chapters of Torah's Kayanim. All the different details of the different korbanos in different circumstances. And we are introduced into the world of animal sacrifices. Just a couple of sentences about that. This world of animal sacrifices is, on the one hand, completely familiar to us as readers of the Tanakh, from the very beginning of Cain and Hevel and Noach and the Avos, all the way through the Korban Pesach and the Korbanos in the Chumash and in the whole of the Leviim and the Ksuvim. Throughout the time there was a Mishkan and a Beis HaMikdash, animal sacrifices played a central role in Jewish life. And in that sense we're completely familiar with it. On the other hand, it is in a sense a closed book for us on a different level, that it's a complete mystery, I think, to our mindset. In what way was the witnessing of the slaughter of an animal and sprinkling of the blood and dismembering it and burning the flesh of the animal, in what way was this an uplifting spiritual experience? It's difficult for us to understand. One of the many things that Eliyahu Hanavi and Moshiach will have to explain to us when the moment arrives, b'mheira b'yomeinu. I'll call upon him. In the meantime, we are learning Torah. And the Torah is Me'iras Einayim and Omedes Lo'ad, has an eternal message which opens up our eyes and our thoughts for every generation. And every generation finds different meaning and understanding in the words of the Torah. And the Korbanos are no exception to this rule. And therefore we learn Kodshim and we learn Sefer Vayikra, and we delve deeply into the meaning of the words of the Chumash to understand the message that the Torah wishes to give us. And I'd like to have a look at two brief points on this subject. The first one is the Pasuk I just mentioned, which is the second Pasuk of the Parsha, Odom ki yakriv mikem korban laHashem. A very unusual use of the word Odom. We're familiar with the word Odom of the first man, Odom Arishon. But generally speaking, the Torah uses the word Ish ki yakriv mikem, or it just doesn't say anything at all. It could say Daber b'nei Yisrael ki takrivu korban laHashem. It could simply mention it using pronouns. Why does it use the word Odom here in a very unusual context? So, a couple of words about the word Odom. The word Odom itself is a very fascinating word. One of the primary words of the whole Chumash. That and I'd like to just mention a couple of insights into this very powerful word. Odom actually is a word referring to man, but also referring to mankind. In the Pasuk in the Chumash, it says that man and woman were both called Odom in a certain sense. And therefore, Odom is a reference to not just the man, but mankind. And Odom, the Hebrew word Odom, Aleph Daled Mem, is a coded form of something very important. Aleph Daled Mem, so the Mefarshim say, that is a reference to, the Kliyaka mentions it, others mentioned it, it's a combination of Aleph plus Dam, where the Aleph represents the Yichud Shel Olam, is the Hashem Echad, the unique oneness, the Ein Sof, the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that bequeathed to us all a neshama and a tzelem Elokim, the spiritual dimension of every human being. That's the Aleph. Something which is unpronounceable, as every Aleph is. It's something which is simply the very beginning of all existence, and indeed pre-existed even Bereishis Bara Elokim. Bereishis Bara Elokim, the physical creation, begins with the letter Beis, but the Aleph before it refers to the world of Adonai Olam Hashem Olach, B'terem Kol Yetzir Nivra. Before anything was created, we had the Aleph, the infinite essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is within the human being and not within any other creature on planet Earth. And you combine that with the Aleph combined with the Dam, the blood representing the life force of the physical human being, and the Aleph and the Dam together is the Odom, the unique combination of Guf and Neshama, which is mankind. So that's the first thing to mention. Incidentally, the Arizal also mentions that Odom, Aleph, Daled, Mem is an acrostic for the Aleph is Emunah, stands for Emunah, our connection to our belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and our sense of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world is the Aleph. The Daled represents Dibur, is the way we speak, the speech, both the speech in terms of using speech for Tefillah and Torah, and Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, to speak in a way which enhances human relationships and our relationships to Hashem. And the Mem is Maisa, is actions. So thought, speech, and actions are all alluded to in the Aleph Daled Mem of Odom. So this word that appears in the second pasuk of the parsha has got many beautiful insights into the nature of the human being. But the point that I'd like to make in this context is that we find the word Odom as a reference to human beings, meaning mankind beyond Klal Yisrael. Odom ki yakriv mikem alludes to the fact that korbanos are not meant to be uniquely, or should I say exclusively, for Jewish people. And indeed we find many references to the fact that any God-fearing non-Jew, any God-fearing Gentile, was welcome to come into the Mishkan and the first and the second Beis HaMikdash, was welcome to come in order to bring a korban. This is mentioned explicitly in the Gemara in Menachos Daf Ayin Gimel, where it says Umas ha'olam nodrim nedavos, that they can bring korbanos of their own free will. They aren't, of course, obligated in the korban chayva, any of the obligatory korbanos, but if they want to bring korbanos because they feel this will bring them closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they're welcome to do so. And it means that indeed there are many references to this. For example, a famous pasuk in Yeshaya, Ki beisi beis tefillah yikorei l'chol ha'amim. Yeshaya says that the Beis Hashem, the Beis HaMikdash, is a Beis tefillah l'chol ha'amim for all nations of the world. And therefore this includes also non-Jews coming to daven. Also there's a reference in Malachim Aleph chapter 8, when Shlomo HaMelech makes his inaugurating speech for the Beis HaMikdash. He also references the fact that also the Nochri who comes me'erech surchoka, who wishes to come in order to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beis HaMikdash, he's welcome. And indeed in my rabbinic life I've been asked a couple of times whether I object to a non-Jewish person being present in the shul during davening, and I say absolutely not. We welcome God-fearing non-Jewish people, provided they are dressed and behave in the appropriate way, that they're welcome to come and daven with us together because of this halacha. And the Rambam paskins this in Hilchos Ma'aser Korbanos, chapter 3, that Nedorim, that the Goyim, Nodrim, Nedavos, that non-Jews can also bring Korbanos. And one of the reference of this, one of the sources of this, is the fact that it says here, Odom ki yakriv mikem. That the Odom, the human being, can bring a korban, provided he does it with the right kavanas, and with the right emunah, with the right dibur, and the right maisa. This is something which is a universal aspect of the korbanos. And indeed, Rosh Shimshon Raphael Hirsch here on this pasuk makes a whole issue out of the universal dimension of the korbanos, which is rooted both in the Tanakh and in Chazal and in Halacha, and has its expression here in the word Odom. We find, for example, also in Pirkei Avos, the Mishnah says that Choviv Odom shenivro b'tzelem is a reference to the Odom, meaning all mankind have a tzelem Elokim, Jews and non-Jews alike. The Mishnah goes on to say, Chavivim Yisrael shenikro bonim lamokai. So it's true that Klal Yisrael have a special role to play in the world, a role of Mamleches Kohanim, the Goy Kodesh, but every human being has the potential to be a moral and God-fearing individual, and in that capacity is welcome to bring korbanos. And it's interesting that in the very beginning of Sefer Vayikra, that word appears inviting members of mankind to participate in the korbanos, in the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, and ultimately in the Beis HaMikdash, which will one day be rebuilt. That's the first point I wanted to make about Adam. And then the second point I wanted to make is something which I've mentioned maybe in a different context, and that is the most frequent korban that was brought in the Beis HaMikdash, irrespective of what type of day it was, whether it was a weekday, a Shabbos, a Rosh Chodesh, a Yom Kippur, that every day began and ended the same way. It began with the korban Tomid, which was brought at daybreak, and it ended with the Tomid Shabbein HaArbayim, which was brought at the end of the afternoon, before nightfall, at the close of the procedures in the Beis HaMikdash. And these were the Shnei Tamidim. And we say in our Musaf davening, when we bring, for example, Rosh Chodesh, when we recently, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, in the Tfilas Musaf, we say the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, and then we end up with Shnei Tamidim Kehilchasam. In addition to every Musaf, there was the Shnei Tamidim. And there's a very interesting Dvar Torah 500 years ago from Krakow, from the Ramah of Krakow. Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, so he writes, as we all know, he writes his commentary into the text of the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch was written by Rabbi Yosef Cairo, who was representing the Sephardi world of Psak and the Rambam, whereas the Ramah represented the Ashkenaz Psak of Rashi and Tosfos, and together they combine to create the Shulchan Aruch. What's interesting is that the section of the Shulchan Aruch most familiar to us, which is Orach Chaim, and gives us the halachas of the whole annual cycle and the daily cycle, the halachas of davening and tefillin and tefillah and tzitzis and Birkas Hamazon and then Shabbos and Yom Tov and Yom Kippur, etc. That is Orach Chaim. Interestingly, so the Ramah brings at the very, very beginning, his opening lines, he brings the pasuk from Tehillim, Shevisi Hashem Lenegdi Tov. That if you want to know what all these halachas are about, it's in order to bring the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to our awareness, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should always be in our mind and in our focus, that we are living in God's world. Not in a random world, as the scientists want us to believe, but in a world of Hashgacha Pratis, and Shevisi Hashem Lenegdi Somid. That is the opening pasuk. The closing pasuk, 697 chapters later, the very, very last line, is dealing with the halachas of Purim Katan, and there it speaks about making a seudah, and there it says, he ends up with a line from Mishlei, chapter 13, the Tov Leiv Mishte Tomid, that if somebody has a Tov Leiv, that in his heart he has good thoughts and positive ideas, and ideas of Simcha, Mishte Tomid, it's as if he's always Yachei Mishte. He feels constantly that he is celebrating. So he starts off with the Emunah of Shevisi Hashem Benegdi Samid, and he ends with Tov Leiv Mishte Tomid. Say the Talmidim of the Ramah that he had in mind this phrase, Ushnei Tamidim Kilchosam, a most profound insight into the life of every human being. That every human being has got many variables in our lives. Some days we feel good, some days not so good. Sometimes we're successful, less successful. Sometimes we're growing, sometimes we're not. But one thing is sure, there are Shnei Tamidim. There are two things which are not variables, they are constants. What are the constants? That we start off the world with Emunah of Shevisi Hashem Lenegdi Samid, and we end up with Tov Leiv Mishte Tomid. These two are the two Tamidim Kilchosam. In our lives, even though we don't have the Karbonos today, maybe we don't understand them, but we have in our lives the Tamidim, that which is Tomid, that which is constant, our awareness, our Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and our Simcha, our joy which is created by the privilege of being able to do mitzvahs and to engage in a life of Avodas Hashem. That gives us a Simcha which can't be diluted by any events that take place during the day, and that is Shnei Tamidim Kil Chosam. There are two things in life which are constants, and hopefully we will all experience these Tamidim in the coming month, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is Chodesh HaGeula, and I wish everybody a Chodesh Tov u'Mevorach v'chein Yirot.